This film was never meant to survive. Born from myth, reshaped by fear, and nearly destroyed by the people who made it. What you see on screen is not a single vision, but the remains of a creative war. The monsters were never just in the fog. They were behind the camera. This is the 13th Warrior, a legend buried alive by ambition, panic, and control. Number 1. A film born under a curse. Before it was called The 13th Warrior, the film carried a darker name, Eaters of the Dead. And even that title felt like a warning. Director John McTiernan, coming off Die Hard and Predator, set out to do something dangerous. He didn't want a loud fantasy. He wanted myth told like history, quiet, cold, and unsettling. A Viking saga that felt less like entertainment and more like a recovered document. His original cut leaned heavily into silence. Battles were brief. Fear came from what you couldn't see. The monsters were fragments in fog, not creatures clearly explained. But when test audiences finally saw this version, the reaction terrified the studio. Viewers were confused. Some were bored. Others felt disturbed in ways they couldn't articulate. To the studio, the message was clear. The film was too strange, too slow, too uncommercial. That's when author and producer Michael Crichton stepped in. Crichton ordered rewrites. Entire scenes were restructured. New dialogue was added. The tone began shifting away from grounded horror and toward traditional adventure. What followed was not collaboration, but collision. Two masters, two visions, one film that could not contain them both. The editing room became a battlefield. Every cut was a compromise, every scene a negotiation. By the time the film reached theaters, it was no longer one man's legend. It was a patchwork forged between opposing wills, carrying the scars of both. And the real story of the 13th Warrior had already been decided long before audiences ever saw The Fog. Number 2. The Mother Who Was Erased. In the earliest version of the film, the Wendell's mother was never meant to be a warrior queen. She was something far older, something almost immobile. In John McTiernan's original cut, the character was written as an ancient matriarch, skeletal, silent, and terrifying in her stillness. She didn't command through strength. She commanded through inevitability. Veteran actress Susan Willis portrayed her as a figure carved from time itself, closer to a ritual object than a living enemy. When the warriors finally reached her lair, the act of killing her felt less like victory and more like sacrilege. And that was the problem. During test screenings, audiences recoiled. They didn't cheer. They felt uncomfortable. Some even described the scene as cruel rather than heroic. Once Michael Crichton took control of the reshoots, the decision was immediate. The mother had to change. She was recast as a younger, more physical presence. Her stillness was replaced with aggression. Her mystery traded for motion. The role was reshot under layers of fur and shadow, reshaped to fit a clearer idea of an enemy audiences could accept. Yet when the credits rolled, the original actress's name remained. No announcement, no explanation. Just a ghost, credit a trace of a version of the film no one outside the crew was ever meant to see. The mother's face changed, but the myth didn't. What survived was a symbol of how fear, test cards, and discomfort can rewrite legend itself. A goddess altered not by story, but by reaction. Number 3. The score that never survived. When the film began, its music was already complete, and it was nothing like what audiences eventually heard. Composer Graeme Revell had written a full score for McTiernan's original cut, a soundscape built on restraint. Low percussion, Nordic chants, sparse rhythms that felt ancient and cold. The music didn't guide emotion. It hovered, it observed, it allowed silence to breathe. But once the film changed hands, the score became collateral damage. Crichton wanted something bigger, more emotional, more recognizable, music that would tell audiences exactly how to feel. Revell's work was discarded entirely, not revised, not layered, erased. Legendary composer Jerry Goldsmith was brought in to rebuild the film's soul from scratch. Working under intense pressure, Goldsmith reshaped key sequences, turning stoic battles into sweeping spectacle. Brass gave the warriors nobility. Strings softened the outsider's journey. Drums pushed the fog toward grandeur instead of dread. What audiences heard was triumph. What they never heard was an entire score buried beneath the final cut. Two musical identities. One erased so the other could survive. The irony was brutal. A film about lost history quietly lost one of its most authentic voices. And once again, the real casualty wasn't on screen. It was behind it. Number 4. A budget that bled out. Few films of the 1990s collapsed under their own weight the way this one did. What began as a bold historical experiment with an estimated budget of around $85 million quickly spiraled into something far more dangerous. Endless rewrites, massive reshoots, entire action sequences rebuilt from scratch. With two competing creative authorities pulling the film in opposite directions, production dragged on for years. Sets were reconstructed, battles were filmed again and again. Scenes were reshaped not to serve story, but to calm fear. Insiders later whispered that once delays, marketing, and last-minute fixes were added, the true cost may have climbed far beyond $100 million. Some estimates pushed it even higher. By the time the film was finally ready for release in August 1999, the battlefield had already changed. The summer box office belonged to films like The Sixth Sense and The Blair Witch Project. Audiences had moved on. Momentum was gone. The film opened quietly. No roar, no triumph. It earned barely $60 million worldwide, a fraction of what it cost to make. Once envisioned as the next great historical epic, it became a cautionary tale, a reminder that money cannot fix uncertainty, and that panic, once introduced, only multiplies the damage. The true defeat did not happen on screen. It happened long before release, when ambition lost control of itself. Number 5. The cut that haunts the film. For decades, rumors have refused to die. Crew members spoke of an earlier version, 5 to 10 minutes longer, with slower pacing and deeper character moments. A cut that leaned harder into silence and ritual. A version where politics, fear, and culture carried more weight than spectacle. There were whispers of a tender subplot between Ahmad and a Viking noblewoman. Moments that humanized the warriors beyond battle. Quiet farewells that gave the journey emotional gravity. When control shifted, those threads vanished. The climax was rewritten. Dialogue was replaced. Scenes were restructured to push heroism forward and horror into the background. Fragments of that original cut still exist. In early trailers, in production stills, in shots that feel strangely disconnected from the final rhythm of the film, fans have spent years trying to reconstruct what was lost, calling it Eaters of the Dead, the director's cut that never surfaced. Whether it still exists is unknown. Like the Wendell themselves, it lingers as a shadow, half memory, half myth, a version devoured by time. Number 6. A novel written on a dare. Long before cameras rolled, the story already carried an unusual origin. The source material began as a 1976 novel titled Eaters of the Dead. Michael Crichton wrote it after a friend casually dismissed Beowulf as boring. Crichton took that as a challenge. Instead of retelling the epic, he dismantled it. He fused myth with anthropology, reimagined monsters not as supernatural beings, but as something far more unsettling human. The novel blurred the line between legend and history, presenting itself like a recovered travelogue that slowly descended into nightmare. Its tone was cold, detached, hypnotic. Warriors faced horrors that reason could not fully explain. Fear came not from magic, but from extinction, belief, and ritual. Hollywood saw the book as irresistible, a story where ancient heroism collided with modern realism, where myth was dragged into the mud and forced to bleed. Ironically, that same ambition became the film's greatest burden. What worked on the page demanded patience on screen, and patience was the one thing the studio never had. Number 7. A hero who actually existed. Ahmad ibn Fadlan was not invented for the screen. He was real, a 10th century Arab diplomat, scholar, and observer. Ibn Fadlan traveled from Baghdad to the edge of the known world on a mission to meet the Volga Bulgars. What survived of his journey were writings careful, detailed, and unsettling in their honesty. He described the Norsemen he encountered without romance, their ships, their rituals, their hygiene, their funerals. These accounts became the backbone of Eaters of the Dead. The monsters, however, were something else entirely. Crichton drew inspiration from prehistoric bear cults and early human extinction myths, imagining the Wendell as a tribe clinging to survival through ritual and fear. Not demons, not magic, but people reshaped by belief. The film merges these two worlds until they become inseparable. Documented history collides with imagined terror. Fact dissolves into fear. That fusion is why the story feels ancient and grounded at the same time. A scholar meets something he cannot fully explain, and the world grows larger and darker because of it. Number 8. Why the number 13 mattered. The number 13 was never a coincidence. In Old Norse legend, King Hrolfkraki rode with 12 champions, warriors bound by loyalty and fate. Among them was Bodvar Bjarki, a figure often linked by scholars to the myth of Beowulf himself. 12 warriors. One sacred circle. The 13th warrior deliberately breaks that symmetry. Ahmad ibn Fadlan is not part of the legend. He completes it. As an outsider, he becomes the 13th man, not the strongest, not the fiercest, but the witness. The one who observes. The one who records. His presence transforms myth into story. Without him, the tale dies with the warriors. With him, it survives. The film quietly reframes heroism. Strength belongs to the Northmen. Memory belongs to the outsider. And history belongs to whoever writes it down. Number 9. The monsters you never really see. One of the film's most deliberate choices is what it refuses to show. The Wendel are rarely seen clearly. They appear in fragments, fur slipping through fog, bone masks flashing in torchlight, screams swallowed by darkness. This was not a limitation, it was intent. McTiernan wanted the audience to doubt what they were seeing, to question whether the monsters were supernatural or simply human beings hiding behind myth. The fear comes from absence, not spectacle. This approach draws from ancient Northern European folklore, stories of cannibal tribes who attacked in mist and vanished without a trace. The film resurrects that dread, turning anthropology into horror. Fog becomes an enemy. Silence becomes a threat. What remains unseen becomes unbearable. By refusing to define the monsters too clearly, the film forces the audience to confront a darker idea. That terror doesn't need explanation. It only needs belief. And sometimes, the most frightening thing is realizing that the monsters were human all along. Number 10. The scene that taught a language without words. One of the film's most powerful moments contains no battle at all, no blood, no spectacle. It is a scene about listening. When Ahmad first travels north, he understands nothing the Vikings say. Around the fire, their voices blur into noise, laughter, arguments, rituals spoken in a foreign tongue. Night after night, the same sounds repeat. Then something changes. Without explanation, without subtitles, the language slowly becomes English. Not because the Vikings change, but because Ahmad does. The camera circles his face, as understanding replaces confusion. Learning becomes visible. Comprehension becomes transformation. This was McTiernan's idea, and it survived every rewrite. Critics later called it one of the most elegant language transitions ever filmed. A cinematic illusion that turns adaptation into revelation. In a story obsessed with monsters, this quiet moment becomes the first real victory. The outsider doesn't survive through strength. He survives by understanding. Number 11. Culture clash before bloodshed. Before swords ever meet, the film builds tension through discomfort. Ahmad arrives among the Norse as an observer horrified by their customs. Food shared by hand. Water poured from the same bowl. Bodies unwashed. McTiernan films these moments like anthropology under pressure. Close-ups linger. Silences stretch. Judgment hangs in the air. But those same details become bridges. Disgust turns into curiosity. Curiosity into respect. The film understands something crucial. Fear of the unknown always comes before violence. By the time the Wendel attack, the audience has already watched two civilizations collide, not with weapons, but with manners, belief, and ritual. The real battle begins long before the first scream. Number 12. Faith as armor. Among warriors who worship thunder and steel, Ahmad carries something different. Faith. Surrounded by men who mock his prayers and cleansing rituals, he never abandons them. Director McTiernan insisted on this detail, ensuring that no matter how chaotic the battle became, Ahmad would always stop to pray. Sometimes the camera barely notices. A bowed head in the fog, a whispered verse before violence. These moments survived every rewrite. While others roar to their gods, Ahmad stands still, calm, unmoving. In a world ruled by strength, his conviction becomes his armor. Not louder than swords, but stronger than fear. When the fighting ends, it is not brutality that endures. It is belief. Number 13. When the monsters lost their myth. Deep inside the Wendel caves, the truth finally surfaces. Skulls carved into masks, pelts worn like armor, ritual markings etched into bone and flesh. The revelation changes everything. These were never supernatural creatures. They were humans who chose to become beasts. McTiernan drew from prehistoric bear cult legends, tribes who believed survival required transformation. To endure, they abandoned identity. To live, they surrendered humanity. The Wendel are not evil for conquest. They fight extinction. This discovery reframes the entire conflict. The Vikings fight to protect civilization. The Wendel fight to preserve their end. Both sides worship survival. Both sides believe they are chosen. In that moment, the film stops being fantasy. It becomes something older, a reminder that the most dangerous monsters are the ones who still believe they are divine. Number 14. Armor as memory. No Viking in the 13th Warrior looks the same, and that was intentional. Their armor doesn't match. Their weapons don't belong to a single culture. Nothing is uniform. Each piece tells a story. Some wear fur and bone. Others carry Roman steel or Eastern chain mail. Every dent, every scar, every stolen blade represents a life survived. In Norse culture, trophies weren't decoration. They were history. McTiernan and the costume team treated each warrior like a moving archive. Men shaped by wars across continents. Historians confirm the accuracy. Norse mercenaries once served in the Byzantine Empire's Varangian Guard, collecting weapons from across the known world. On screen, the warriors look less like a unit and more like a museum of conquest. When light hits their armor, it doesn't shine. It remembers. Number 15. A Nightmare Painted in Fog and Fire. Cinematographer Peter Menzies Jr. gave the film its final voice. Daylight scenes are drained of warmth, cold blues, gray skies, endless fog. The North feels alien, even to those who live there. When night falls, the palette flips. Firelight burns red against black. Faces flicker between shadow and flame. McTiernan wanted the land itself to feel hostile, foreign, unforgiving. Shot in the wilderness of British Columbia, the environment was real. Breath steamed. Storms cut deep. Cold seeped into every frame. The camera lingers on small details, frost clinging to fur, embers reflected in eyes, smoke rolling through silence. The result is not spectacle. It's a fever dream, a world where light chooses sides, where even the landscape feels like part of the war. Number 16. A Viking film that refused fantasy. For a story filled with monsters and myth, The 13th Warrior is surprisingly grounded. Yes, the accents shift. The geography blurs. The timeline bends. But the spirit is right. The Northmen are not shown as savages or caricatures. They are builders. Poets of war. Men who understand fate as deeply as violence. Their rituals matter. Their funerals carry weight. Their camaraderie feels earned. McTiernan drew heavily from Norse sagas, not as literal history, but as emotional truth. The boasting, the drinking, the quiet grief after loss. Even the dialogue reflects this restraint. Words are chosen carefully. Emotion is rarely announced. Filmed in cold, damp wilderness, the world feels lived in, heavy, uncomfortable. It isn't clean history. It's truthful myth. And that distinction is why the film still feels different decades later. It doesn't celebrate war. It endures it. Number 17. A critical execution. When the film finally reached theaters, critics showed no mercy. Many didn't know what to make of it. Was it horror? Adventure? Historical epic? To some, it was all of them and none. Reviews were harsh. The violence felt relentless. The tone confused expectations. The ending unsettled rather than satisfied. Major critics dismissed it as expensive and hollow. Marketing had promised a rousing epic. What audiences received was cold, restrained, and mournful. Yet not all voices agreed. A few critics recognized something rare beneath the chaos. They praised the physicality, the atmosphere. Antonio Banderas's restrained performance, arguing that his calm anchored the storm. What critics labeled confusion, others saw as texture. A film struggling to exist between sincerity and spectacle. It didn't win the argument, but it didn't surrender either. Number 18. The Rise of a Cult Legend. Time changed everything. As the years passed, the film found new life away from theaters, on DVD, online forums, late-night rediscoveries. Audiences who missed it in 1999 saw it differently. They weren't waiting for spectacle. They were looking for atmosphere. And The 13th Warrior delivered. Its fog-drenched tone, its grounded violence, its refusal to explain everything. What once felt bleak now felt honest. The film became a quiet favorite, a lost cause defended fiercely by those who understood it. Directors and cinematographers began citing its restraint, its use of light and shadow, its respect for ritual and silence. What the studio once feared became its greatest strength. The film didn't change. The audience did. Number 19. A hero Hollywood wasn't ready for. In 1999, a Muslim hero leading a major Hollywood epic was almost unheard of. Ahmad ibn Fadlan was not written as comic relief, not as a side character, not as a symbol to be simplified. He was the lens. Through him, the audience entered a world that did not belong to them. Thoughtful, spiritual, observant. His strength was never physical dominance. It was restraint, adaptation, faith. At a time when sword and sandal stories were dominated by European power fantasies, the 13th Warrior made a quiet but radical choice. It handed the legend to an outsider. Ahmad does not conquer the Northmen. He learns them, and by learning, he survives. For many viewers, that representation mattered more than the battles. Courage without conquest. Leadership without domination. The film didn't announce this as progress. It simply lived it. Number 20. A legacy carved in shadow. The film never conquered the box office, but its shadow stretched far beyond 1,999. Its muddy realism, its refusal to glamorize violence, its atmosphere built from fog, fire, and silence. These choices became a blueprint. You can see its influence in later dark fantasy worlds where history feels heavy and myth feels dangerous. Stories where heroes bleed, where rituals matter, where the past is never clean. Cinematographers still study its use of light. Directors still reference its restraint. Its belief that fear grows strongest when explanation disappears. What was once dismissed as bleak slowly became the standard for authenticity. The film may have fallen in theaters, but its spirit marched on. Conclusion: a legend that refused to die. The 13th Warrior was born from myth and undone by ambition. Two visions collided. Control replaced trust. Fear reshaped art. What reached the screen was not the film anyone fully intended to make, but buried beneath the compromises lies something rare. A story that bleeds sincerity. A film that respects ritual. A legend that feels ancient because it was never polished smooth. It stands as a reminder that cinema is not always won by success. Sometimes it survives through scars. The monsters were never only in the cave. They were in the boardrooms, in the editing rooms, in the fear of silence. And yet, through fog and fire, the legend endured. Not perfect, not victorious, but unforgettable.